You hear the word economics, and what do you think of, right? Confusing charts, super dense textbooks. But what if it's actually way simpler? What if it's all just one big argument, a huge clash of ideas over how the world should work? Well, that's exactly what we're going to dive in today.
And really, this entire massive debate, it all comes down to just one question. Is the economy this incredible self-regulating machine that just fixes itself? Or is it more like, an old car that stalls out and needs a jumpstart from the government every now and then? Seriously, how you answer that one question shapes everything. How you vote, how you manage your money, the whole deal.
All right, so let's get a ringside seat for this intellectual heavyweight match. First up, in this corner, you've got the classical view. And their whole deal is this. The economy is like a force of nature, right? It works best when you just leave it alone.
Okay, so this is where we meet our two main contenders. On one side, you've got Adam Smith and his famous idea of the invisible hand. The thinking here is pretty cool. When everyone just does what's best for them, like a baker trying to make a buck, it all magically works out for the good of society. The market just sorts itself out. Their motto is basically laissez-faire, which just means let it be. But then, in the other corner, you have John Maynard Keynes. And he said, whoa, hold on. Sometimes, especially in a crisis, the market gets totally stuck, and that's when the government needs to come in with a helping hand.
So Keynes's big aha moment really came during the Great Depression. He called it the paradox of thrift. Think about it. When things get scary financially, what's the smartest move for you personally? You save your cash, right? You cut back. But what happens when everybody does that at the exact same time? Well, spending just grinds to a halt. Businesses can't sell anything, so they lay people off, which means even less spending, and you get this awful downward spiral. Keynes's whole point was that in that situation, the only thing powerful enough to break the cycle is the government stepping in and spending money.
And look, this isn't just some dusty old academic debate. These ideas have huge, real-world consequences. They lead to completely different playbooks for how to handle a crisis. And there is no better example of this clash in our lifetime than the 2008 financial meltdown.
Now, 2008 didn't just happen one Tuesday. It was a slow-motion train wreck. It all started in the early 2000s with this insane housing boom. Everyone was buying houses. But then, around 2006, the bubble burst. People couldn't pay their mortgages, they started defaulting, and all these complex financial products that were built on top of those mortgages, they suddenly became totally worthless. And that sent shockwaves, absolute panic, through the entire global economy. And you know what happened next, right? The blame game started instantly. So what was it? Did the free market just completely fail on its own? Or did the government somehow mess things up? And surprise, surprise, the answers people gave lined up perfectly with those two big theories we've been talking about.
Okay, so from the free market side, you've got economists like Thomas Sowell who point the finger directly at Washington. Their argument is that it was politicians who forced banks to give out risky loans to people who, frankly, couldn't afford them. So from their perspective, the market didn't fail. No, the government interfered with the market's ability to judge risk, and the crash was a totally predictable result.
But the response to the crisis, that was straight out of the Keynesian playbook. Pure Keynes. People and businesses were terrified, so nobody was spending or investing anything. So what happened? The US government stepped in with these gigantic stimulus plans and bailouts. From the Keynesian point of view, they had no choice. It was either that or risk another Great Depression. They had to fill that spending gap to get money flowing again.
And this fight, it's not over, not by a long shot. This same fundamental disagreement, leave it alone versus step in, is at the heart of our biggest political arguments today, especially when you get to hot-button topics like taxes and trade.
So on the leave it alone side, a really big idea is something called supply-side economics. You've probably heard of it as trickle-down economics. It got super popular back in the 80s with President Reagan. And the idea is, while Keynes was all about boosting demand, getting people to buy stuff, supply-siders say, no, you've got it backward. You need to focus on supply. You need to make it easier for businesses to produce stuff. Here's how the logic is supposed to work. Step 1, you cut taxes, especially for businesses and investors. Step 2, they take that extra cash and, instead of just sitting on it, they invest it. They build new factories, they expand, they hire people. This creates a ton of jobs and makes the whole economic pie bigger. And here's the kicker. The economy grows so much that the government actually ends up collecting more tax money in total, even though the rates are lower.
But there's always a counter-argument, right? And critics of this theory love to bring up the 1990s. Here's why. President Clinton came in and he raised the top tax rates. Now, according to supply-side theory, that should have put the brakes on the economy. But what happened? The exact opposite. The economy absolutely boomed. So, what gives? It seems to totally contradict the theory.
Well, the supply-siders have an answer for that, of course. Someone like Thomas Sowell would argue that, hey, you're looking at the wrong thing. Don't give the credit to the president's tax hikes. He says you should look at Congress, which at the time was really focused on controlling government spending. For him, reining in spending was way more important for that boom than what the tax rates happened to be.
Now, this whole leave the market alone idea, it doesn't stop at the border. It's a huge part of the debate on global trade, and it's built on this classic idea called comparative advantage. The concept is actually pretty straightforward. Let's say the US is better at making both airplanes and t-shirts than, say, another country. It still makes more sense for us to just focus on what we're best at, the airplanes, and let the other country make the t-shirts. Then we trade. The theory says that way both countries end up with more stuff overall. Everybody wins.
And this quote from Sowell really nails the free trade argument. You hear politicians worrying all the time about trade deficits, right? Well, from this point of view, that's just a distraction. I mean, think about it. When you buy something from a store, is it a bad thing? No, you both benefit. You get the thing you want, they get your money. They argue a trade between two countries is exactly the same. It's voluntary, both sides must be getting something out of it, or they just wouldn't do it.
Okay, so we've seen these two big ideas go head-to-head on everything from a massive financial crisis, to taxes, to global trade. So after all of that, what's the big takeaway? Why does any of this matter?
Well, here's the thing. These ideas, the invisible hand versus the helping hand, they aren't just for dusty old textbooks. They're literally the blueprints for almost every political argument you hear every single day. Seriously, next time you hear a politician arguing for tax cuts or getting rid of regulations, you'll know that's the classical leave it alone blueprint. And when you hear another one arguing for a big government spending program or more oversight, yep, that's the Keynesian helping hand blueprint.
Look, the point here wasn't to tell you which side is right. It was to give you the toolkit, the decoder ring, so you can see the logic hiding behind the headlines, so you can understand why they're arguing. So now, the question really goes back to you. When you look at the world around you, which one of these blueprints seems to make the most sense?